You guys, Isaac is really classing the place up with his nice suit these days.
I know, but as you often do on video, and we did during COVID, you don't know what's going on in the bottom. For example, I have
I'm wearing pajama
running
pants.
shorts. I'm wearing running shorts, and I think Isaac's not wearing any pants at all.
Sue-Ann, it's funny. As I was getting dressed, I thought to myself, I just have this odd inkling that Sue-Ann may ask whether I'm wearing pants or not. So I decided to put some dress pants on just for you, Sue-Ann.
You're very
wow.
classy.
Classy the whole way through.
The late Harry Rosen would be proud of you.
Are we still allowed to ask people whether they're wearing pants in 2024? That's a better question for HR. All right, guys, let's get it started. Hey everyone, welcome back to Off the Record True North Friday Fun Show. I'm your host, Rachel Parker, and I am joined today by True North columnist Sue-Ann Levy and our Alberta reporter. And I guess maybe Alberta reporter is a bit too niche. Isaac, I know you do a lot of coverage in Canada as well, but I've sort of dubbed you our Alberta reporter in my place. So consider that quite the title. So thank you both so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I hope to honor the title in your absence, Rachel.
Yes, I'm sure you will. I know every time you come on the Alberta Roundup, everyone is always very happy to have you and to see your insight. So I think generally the people of Alberta are very happy that they're getting more conservative coverage out of the province. So, we've had another interesting week in Canadian politics, starting off with a big story coming out of Western Canada, not Alberta, but just next to us, BC. Basically, the collapse of the BC United this week, with leader Kevin Falcon saying that he would be endorsing the BC Conservatives and that they would be suspending their election campaign entirely. I think a lot of people have been talking about how we are going to be seeing a blue wave in BC come this fall, but I didn't see this withdrawal coming. I heard about it a few hours before it was actually announced on Wednesday. Why don't we just let Kevin Falcon explain in his own words why he decided to suspend his campaign? Take a listen to this clip.
The name is about trying to unite people. But what became apparent to me as I've crisscrossed the province and heard from literally tens of thousands of people is the number one major concern that they had. And that is, Kevin, if you guys don't do the right thing and be the adults in the room and help bring together that free enterprise, center-right, common sense coalition, you are going to help elect an NDP government. And all of you that know me know that there is nothing more important to me and my children and your children and grandchildren that we not give the NDP one more day in power than they absolutely have to have. And that's why I made the decision that I made as leader of BC United to suspend our campaign. I will be withdrawing our candidate nominations, and in cooperation with John Rustad, we will work together to assemble the best possible team of MLAs and candidates that can serve the best interests of British Columbians.
So, I have to be honest, at the ripe old age of 26, I've been covering politics in Canada for, about 5-6 years now. I've already become quite the pessimist. So typically when I see a clip like this, especially when we're doing our Friday Fun Show, my first initial reaction would be to really make fun of Kevin Falcon. The irony of this being is that he obviously kicked John Rustad out of the party back in 2022. Rustad had posted a tweet basically denying the impacts of climate change, and he was kicked out of the BC United for this. And here we are, a year later, and closer to 2 years later, and Kevin Falcon is suspending his campaign and essentially endorsing John Rustad's party. So there's certainly a level of irony here. That being said, I think we can all agree that this is actually the right thing thing for Kevin to do, and it's not very often that we see politicians doing the right thing nowadays. It's not very often that we see politicians recognizing when they are unpopular, when their policies are unpopular. Obviously, the best example of this currently is in the Liberal government. Jagmeet Singh is a very unpopular politician. His party is not doing well, and he's not willing to recognize this. He's also not willing to recognize the fact that the Liberals are not polling well, and that he should end his supply confidence agreement, in which he doesn't even seem to be benefiting from politically, anyways. So, Kevin is actually doing the right thing here, and I think we can definitely commend him for that. But Sue-Ann, you've been around for just a little longer than I have, maybe about 5 or 10 years. So what's your take on this?
Oh, you are very complimentary. I've covered politics for, well, I would say 30 years, and I've seen municipal races, provincial races, and federal ones where the Conservatives have gone down to defeat because they have failed to understand that they need to unite various candidates. I mean, it just happened in our election race here in Toronto where there were 3 or 4 Conservative candidates and the NDP squeaked through. And the NDP is very, very good at organizing. Conservatives, less so. And the egos that are involved in some of these races are unbelievable. But yes, you're right. They did do the right thing despite the history. You know that, what happens in politics lasts about a minute and then they're on to the next shiny object. But, you know, uniting to coalesce the votes around one candidate is definitely the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we're talking about this idea of conservatives, especially needing to unite to coalesce those conservative votes, I mean, Isaac, how successful do you think that this endeavor will be? Do you think that the conservatives will be successful in the fall election in BC?
Yeah, when I first saw this, I initially thought, of course, this would almost guarantee that the Conservatives come out with a victory in the following election. And interestingly, when I was talking about this on Daily Brief the other day, I did a quick historical analysis on other political downfalls in Canadian history. And though Sue-Ann's been covering politics in Canada longer than I've been alive, I'll try and do my best here.
Oh, that was
Never say
okay.
that, lady.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
that hurts. I have a birthday coming up in a couple weeks. Go on.
it's all in good fun. So yeah, just the most notable one that stood out to me, and I looked through various, was obviously Kim Campbell's defeat when she became prime minister after Brian Mulroney resigned. So she won the leadership race. And then interestingly, I found that prior to the election, she had pretty favorable approval ratings, above 50%, but her campaign was an epic failure. And obviously, she only won 2 seats compared to the Liberals led by Jean Chrétien, who won 177. So she got absolutely annihilated. So it'll be interesting to see how this BC United debacle, let's call it, goes down in Canadian history as a political defeat, I suppose, if you want to call it that.
Sure. And when we talk about watching this, how this plays out, Sue-Ann, you've seen these types of situations play out a little more than Isaac and I have. One of the things that I'm wondering is, federally, I think a lot of people are hoping that we're going to have an election sooner rather than later, but I think obviously we'll have one in 2025 with, Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. Do you think that Maxime Bernier's People's Party of Canada is going to be a problem for the Conservatives? Do you think it is going to split that Conservative vote? Or do you think that the PPC really shone during the COVID era when they were the one federal party criticizing government policy around COVID-19, and that we won't see that same level of support for them next year?
I don't think we're going to see the same level. I think he's sort of, you want to say flawed because he's just, embarrassed himself he hasn't kept up, let's say, with the times. And, you've got to be conservative, fiscally conservative, tough on law and order, but you have to understand some of the social realities of Canada. I mean, not bend to transgender philosophy and crazy people and give them all kinds of money, but in the same token, understand, like, I call myself a fiscal conservative, but I'm socially liberal. So I think he's pretty much dead in the water, and I don't think he'll have an impact next year.
Yeah, I see your analysis on that, and I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if we see a resurgence of the PPC in 2025. I don't know if it's quite the year to make it the wedge issue, especially with the Conservatives. I know only in the last few months, but coalescing to Canadians' concerns around immigration. Now, obviously, when this story came out this week of the BC United suspending their campaign, I suspect Conservative households like ours across the country were sort of celebrating, taking this as a good sign of good Conservative momentum out west. However, it was a little overshadowed in my household by this slight irritation. A member of my family, I'm not going to name names, left the house this week. I don't remember which day it was, to go to the convenience store and to pick up a pack of Zonic and have some tobacco pouches, which is really quite a successful method for people who are trying to quit smoking, is to use these tobacco pouches. And apparently the federal government has passed new regulations. You can no longer buy them at convenience stores. So this member of my household basically spent a few hours driving around trying to get his hands on some Zonic or another form of tobacco pouches. I guess you can only buy them at pharmacies now, but it seems like the pharmacies aren't even really on top of this. So we have not had any success. Isaac, why don't you go ahead and tell us what the heck is going on with this?
Yeah, Rachel. Well, firstly, I'll note that you called them tobacco pouches, which they're actually nicotine pouches, which is kind of the Liberals' whole reasoning behind this change that took place on August 28th, which was that these nicotine pouches, known under the brand names of Zonic and Zyn, are no longer able to be sold at convenience stores. Prior to the change, you'd obviously find them most commonly at 7-Eleven, but now they can only be sold in pharmacies. And the Liberals' explanation for this was that youth were acquiring them. As I mentioned, because there's no tobacco in them, they fell outside of the purview of tobacco or vaping laws. So I guess any aged person could buy them, although many of the companies had made them 18 plus, but some of the convenience stores, I guess, weren't honoring this request from the companies. And in fact, the vice president of Imperial Tobacco, Eric Gagnon, he said, quote, "The biggest losers right now are adult smokers that have been using Zonic, and I know there are many of them, myself included." This really took me by surprise because I think it was the August 27th. I went to the store to get some, and I seen the sign that said, "We will no longer be selling these after the 28th because of federal law," which obviously we'd reported on, but that was a while ago and I had forgotten about it. So this was, it sent me into well, it made me a bit mad, especially I went in and I joked with the cashier. I said, "Oh, but don't worry, I can still get a crack pipe for free from the federal government down the corner." And she didn't seem to find that too funny. But this, of course, was the same day, the very same day I wrote the article about drug vending machines in British Columbia, in Victoria, where MLAs were showcasing that you could get a cocaine snorting kit, crack pipes, crack inhalation kits for free from a vending machine outside of an emergency room. So this really seems to be kind of flawed in that sense. I mean, when you look at what's happening with drugs across the country, and really this is the step we're taking. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, I just don't understand why the regulation couldn't have simply been that you had to be over 18 to buy these from convenience stores. Instead, they've made it, very difficult for people who want to buy these products to sort of have to jump through hoops. I'm curious for now, if you're buying it at the pharmacy, is there going to be an uptick in price? Is it going to become more expensive? I mean, if it's not going to become more expensive, okay, like it's not the worst thing. But at the end of the day, I think it's just the irritation, the annoyance. Like, it's so quick and easy to run into a convenience store to pick something up. Now you're going to have to track down a pharmacy. There's probably going to be a bit of a longer wait. And, we should actually be promoting these products for people who are trying to quit smoking, because like taking one of these, as you said, corrected me, yes, nicotine pouches is obviously a lot less harmful for your body than inhaling smoke. So if anything, we should be kind of, and I already know that there's more restrictions on the products that we offer here in Canada, or yeah, because for example, I know in the States you can get Zyn, which is really popular for people who are quitting smoking. I believe Tucker Carlson sort of infamously always has some Zyn in his mouth, and here we only have Zonic. So there's already a lot of restrictions around what you can get here in Canada, and they've just made it even harder to get. And I am just curious, like, let's follow the money. Let's see who's actually benefiting from the fact that this is now only going to be available at pharmacies, because it just doesn't make sense when they could have gone the route of enforcing it at convenience stores and telling convenience stores they had to be checking IDs for people who were buying these products like they already do for people who are buying cigarettes. What do you think, Sue-Ann?
Well, I think there's a tremendous irony. I mean, you already talked about you have to be 18 to walk into a safe injection site and get your arm shot up with some sort of illegal drug. Um, I think there's a great irony. And I think it also, I mean, I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist. I've been in journalism far too long. But I think that our government wants to maintain a dependent society. Okay. So if the smoking cessation drug is not available, readily available, then, you know, you can you will continue to smoke, and they want people to be dependent on the government to stay addicted to whatever. There's harm reduction for alcohol, there's harm reduction for drugs, and here they're taking away your attempts to be independently able to break the smoking habit. I mean, think about it. It's like so crazy the way their mind, I don't know if they even have a mind, whether their mindset works, but that I could take somebody who's 12, 13 years old into a safe injection site. I'm sure they wouldn't ask for ID. They just say, okay, shoot them up. And, you know, we have created this mind numbing group of addicts across this country with these safe injection sites. I am obviously not a fan. I just loathe what the drug industry has done to these people.
When we talk about sort of, Suanna, as you mentioned, the government seems to want to keep people dependent, which I absolutely agree with. Let's just dig into that, Foxo, a little bit more. Like, what do you think are the actual reasons for the government wanting to keep people so dependent on these really life-altering substances in the worst possible way?
Well, I think I said drug industry. So let's talk about drugs for a minute. I mean, but you could apply it to anything. You could apply it to poverty. You could apply it to homelessness. I mean, I've covered all those files. Um, the more people are dependent, the more there are jobs, the more there is money infusing into various governments at various levels. It's all about the money. Follow the money. Um, there's big bucks in keeping those safe injection sites alive. And that's why people here in my province of Ontario went so crazy in the last week with the announcement by Doug Ford that he was going to shut down sites by schools within 200 meters that have created just absolute havoc with these poor kids. I mean, I've done numerous stories on how these schools have been impacted. They don't care. They just want to keep the industry thriving. You got a ragtag group of drug activists standing up at the legislature here in Ontario talking about how people are going to die because of the closures, but it's all about them. I believe it's all about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about, the safe injection sites being close to schools, like as a recent parent myself, I just feel like life in Canada is getting harder and harder for parents. Like there's so few
Right.
places that you can bring your kids that's safe nowadays. Like for me, the desire is just to sort of kind of be at home or like in a small town. Like I just don't even want to go out with my son anymore because I feel like there's danger lurking at every corner. Maybe that's a symptom of me being online too much, but I think definitely are all feeling the impacts of how unsafe Canada has become under the Trudeau Liberals and their just bail system, everyone getting out on bail all the time, and all these other policies like safe injection sites. Isaac, for this story that we're looking at here, specifically on the nicotine pouches, do you think that this is something that Canadians are really aware of? As I mentioned, like there is a member of my household who regularly uses these things and went to buy his pack this week and realized that, oh, the regulations have changed. You can only get that on pharmacy. Do you think this is something that was understood and was sort of people were given advance notice of, or was this sort of slipped in quietly?
Yeah, that's a tough one. As I said, we had previously reported on it, and it still slipped to my mind until literally the day before when I went to the 7-Eleven and they had the signs plastered on their doors. So in that sense, I want to think that people had either not heard about it or probably forgotten about it. This definitely wasn't something that was in the news. Like breaking tomorrow, nicotine pouch is no longer available. I don't think legacy medias were reporting that specifically. So yeah, I don't think that they necessarily were aware of it prior to the change, but they certainly are now, because one thing I wanted to mention with convenience stores no longer selling them, many people would have probably gotten these pouches, for example, let's say before a night out, before going out on the town, so late at night, whereas pharmacies obviously aren't open 24/7 like convenience stores are. So that really is a big part of the change, I think, because the time frame where you can actually go to a pharmacy is much more limited than, say, a 7-Eleven. So that's definitely a bad thing, because I think the nighttime, is definitely a common time for people to be consuming nicotine.
Yeah, you raise a really good point there. I mean, sugar's kind of my vice, and if I'm up past 9 p.m., which I usually am, usually about that time, I'm like, I wonder what we have that I can snack on. And for that reason, I never keep sugar in the house, because I get the munchies in the evenings. It's just better if I don't have it. It makes it difficult for me to get. Then usually I can manage to not have any. But I mean, even as you mentioned, Isaac, we True North covered this story, but I mean, Canadians even have a hard time finding our news, because you can no longer get it on Facebook and Instagram and all these crazy things. I don't really use those platforms very much anymore, so I sometimes forget that we're not really on them. But it does baffle me, or at least we can't very easily post our articles on them. So makes it just more difficult for Canadians to even have access to these news, which is why it's important that we do shows like this to tell people what's going on and to keep them informed. And speaking of, Isaac, I know that you had a good exclusive this week. Why don't you share with us what that was about?
Yeah, so people, again, going back to the past, may remember hearing about this. 5 years after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau pledged to plant 2 billion trees by the year 2030, the Liberal government is barely a quarter of the way there. So first of all, I was trying to find these numbers when I was writing the article on, like, okay, how many trees have they planted to date? Impossible to find. The last update the Liberals did was August 2023. So I emailed Natural Resources Canada, and they told me, they actually gave me the most updated number that you'll find anywhere, which was 553 million. But the caveat there is that they said this is an agreement, essentially, to plant 553 million trees to date. So it's not that they've planted 553 million trees. It's that in some way, shape, or form, they have theoretically agreed to plant 553 million trees. But even with that number, this theoretical, hypothetical number, they would have had to have planted 700 million trees so far to be on pace for that 2 billion goal. So they're already behind that, even with their imaginary number, if you want to call it that. And this all came from a press release where Forest Ontario was bragging that they planted 2.7 million trees this year, bringing their national total to 46.5 million. Though another story we did in the past was a 2023 audit done by Canada's Environment Commissioner, Jerry DeMarco, where he found that the goal would basically, it was impossible to meet unless, quote, significant changes were made. So by the time of that audit, the goal was 30 million trees by 2021, 60 million by 2022. And he said that they were already 45 million trees behind the targets. So, I mean, they're nowhere near. His projections, in fact, showed that 76 million trees, so that's 3.8% of the 2 billion promised, would be planted by 2030. So, I mean, they're nowhere near this. And this is, of course, another empty promise by the Liberal government. One last thing I'll add is something Blacklock's reported, where they said they found an internal memo from the Natural Resources Department that said the 2 billion trees number, was just a slogan, and it wasn't to be taken literally. So that's what this Liberal promise is, just an empty slogan. Yeah, are you guys surprised to hear that this promise is not going to be kept?
Not the slightest. But I'm surprised that they didn't plant more trees, because clearly, pardon the pun, it's Friday and it's off the record. Clearly, the Liberal government thinks that money does grow on trees. So the more trees they have, the more money they will have.
I just feel like their efforts would be better focused, instead of worrying about planting all these new trees, is protecting some of the ones that we already have. So for example, take a look at the crazy forest fires that we have going on in Western Canada specifically. I do believe that forest fires are a natural part of the cycle, but it would be a great benefit to all of us if we were to prioritize some controlled burns in areas where, for example, all the trees have been killed by bugs. What's the pine beetles
Pine
is the
beetles, yeah.
ones, yes, pine beetles coming through, focus on controlled burns with those areas where the trees are dead instead of just letting the dead trees pile up. And then we get a forest fire that gets very hot and out of control and burns, hectares of good, healthy trees. And then, then they would be able to sort of save money in the process, and they could count that as success because instead of planting new trees, they had sort of saved existing trees. So I just feel like their efforts here are not exact. They're a bit misguided. I don't have an issue with planting new trees, but I just believe let's sort of prioritize like the natural cycle of nature and things.
And I would say also that in cities, and it filters right down to cities, development is out of control. And when you develop large apartment buildings or large condos or whatever, affordable housing, which is not so affordable, you take down trees. And there is not, I guess, an imperative to replace these trees. They say they are, but they don't. And it really, really breaks my heart to see some of these trees coming down so freely and so easily. The forest canopy is so important to keep us cool and to fight climate change. They always talk about climate change, but they don't practice what they preach, of course.
Also feel like it's really depressing to live in an area where there are no trees.
Trees, yes, exactly. I happen to be very fortunate to live near a trail that's been reconverted. It was a railway line, and now it's called the Belt Line, and it's in Midtown Toronto, and it's beautiful. And I run on it, I bike on it, and those kinds of things should not be the exception to the rule in cities.
Isaac, with this policy being, from the Liberal government, obviously they're not going to be able to fill that pledge before the next election, which seems like they'll lose. Do you think that this is something that the Conservatives are going to be interested in carrying forward, or do you think that this is sort of just something Trudeau wanted and obviously has not succeeded at?
Yeah, that's I hadn't really considered whether the Conservatives would pick up this goal, though. I would imagine that they might use it as background in a debate against Trudeau. Of course, this wouldn't be a main talking point, but if they're talking about the many broken promises from this Liberal government, certainly this could be on the list. As for whether the Conservatives will pick it up, I mean, who knows? I could certainly see that happening, though. I mean, they'll say, "Hey, look, we'll do what the Liberals said they would and failed to do. We'll actually plant the 2 billion trees," or the goal could be revised by then. But yeah, obviously, as Sue-Ann said, trees are just an important part of life, and really nature in general shouldn't be the exception. So it'd be great to see them pick it up.
One of the things that I think still surprises me most about Alberta is obviously it being a prairie is how few trees there are in like certain parts of the province. Obviously, there's a lot of trees in the mountains, a decent amount in the foothills, but when you get to the actual prairie, then a lot less other than in certain little ravines and things. Is there trees a lot of trees where you live in Edmonton, Isaac?
Yeah, I'd say there's a decent amount of trees, and obviously, I used to live in Northwest Alberta when I worked for the French radio station there, and there was a lot of trees up there. I'll tell you that much because yeah, there weren't that many people, right? So that's the difference. Where there's not a lot of people, there are a lot of trees.
No development.
Exactly.
Well, and the prairies offer their own sort of unique beauty to things. My husband and I just bought a house, and I was very excited that there's a big tree that the last owners planted in the backyard. So I feel like it's a little piece of Ontario for me in Alberta.
Yeah, we have a huge tree in our backyard, but given its angle, and it could be a problem in years to come because
So it could
we
have
might need
fallen
to cut
down.
it down so it doesn't crash into the house. Exactly, and it's huge, so it would be a very big problem.
Well, I think that's everything that we have for today. Unless anyone has any more thoughts on trees, what's everyone's favorite type of tree?
Oh, I love the ones that change color in the fall. Maple trees. Um, I love palm trees. Sorry to say that, but I absolutely adore palm trees.
Suanne is definitely a Floridian at heart. Mine is definitely the willow.
Is a cactus a tree?
I don't know.
That's a very prickly question.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to Off the Record today. We hope that you guys have a great and fun weekend. If you have been feeling a little bit angsty this week because you haven't been able to get your hands on some nicotine, good luck with that. Let us know which pharmacies they are selling it at. I'm asking for a friend, of course. Don't forget that everything you heard today was off the record.
Sue-Ann, you had the really good puns today.
Yeah, you were on it with the puns. I've never really been any good at
Oh,
getting.
God, I hope they weren't too corny.
No,
Well, they're
they
puns.
made me laugh.
The
Thanks,
definition.
Isaac, for saying that I've covered politics longer than you've been alive. Now you really made me feel good.
Yeah, Isaac, you
Yeah.
might have the class of the suit, but you got to add a little class in the personality as well.